I'm going to be talking a little about my personal association with Jayananda Prabhu. It was his disappearance day on last Friday, I think it was. And so it was owing to various circumstances I wasn't able to speak on that day. But anyway, better late than never. This is a photograph that was taken of Jayananda on May the 1st, 1977. I'll pass it around. And that's me standing behind him holding the wheelchair. Yeah. And also this is a photograph of Jayananda. It was a photograph made into with a garland around it. And there's two pictures. One is that picture of Jayananda Prabhu with garlanded by Kishori, and as are her flowers underneath, the red flowers and the garland. And also it appeared in the Brisbane Ratha Yatra cart. Prabhupada asked us, there it is. So I'll pass these two around too. These photographs were taken of a painting, and some of them were actual photographs, and they were made into. And Prabhupada asked that they be placed on the Ratha Yatra carts all over the world. So I think they were. I know they were in Moscow, and I'm probably in every time there's a Ratha Yatra, there's a picture of Jayananda Prabhu. It wasn't until probably the second year. So anyway, I'll talk a little about Jayananda Prabhu, my personal associations with him. One of the earliest associations I had with him was when he was still on this planet. He was ill. He had his own room in Los Angeles with a hospital bed in it, because he had a kind of terminal disease, leukemia or something like that. But anyway, I'll talk about what he ordered a lot of wood for the Ratha Yatra even before the local people had given permission for the festival to take place in Los Angeles. This happened I was in London when this happened. I was in Victoria Station. It's a train station that goes out to the airport, Gatwick Airport. And while I was waiting for the train to pick me up and take me out to the airport, I noticed there was a guy kind of following me around, not exactly following, but just kind of hanging around. And he was kind of tallish and had a beard, and anyway, we got to talking somehow. He didn't look like a devotee. I didn't know who he was. And he said that he had been working in Denmark on ships. He'd been building the internal part of yachts, and that's what he was doing. And he was living on a boat in the marina somewhere in Denmark. And as we got to talking, it turned out that he knew Jayananda, and it was one of the people that he remembered. Anyway, we got on the train, and we talked some more, and then when we got out to the airport, he was in a different seat than in the airplane, so I didn't get to talk to him till later. Anyway, he said that he was going down to a place called Newport Beach, which is near Laguna Beach. It's a kind of a very affluent little town. It's right on the Pacific Ocean. Most of the people live right on the waterfront. They have boats, and it's that kind of a place. Anyway, he said he was going down there, so I just let it go at that. And then when I spoke with Jayananda about this guy, and I mentioned his name was Bhadra Sena. He said, "Oh yeah, Bhadra Sena, I know him." And he said, "I'd like to see him." And but Jayananda was very ill in this hospital bed. He couldn't move around very much, and if he did any moving, it was in a wheelchair. But he insisted that he go down to Newport Beach. Is about maybe 45-minute drive from us, not very far away. But we didn't know exactly where he was, so I phoned Bhadra Sena. He left. We exchanged telephone numbers before on the train, and it turned out that he was working in a petrol station, and he wasn't in Newport Beach proper. It was in a sort of what they call pumping gas. He was dispensing petrol to the people who pulled up into the lot, into the petrol station. So I told Jayananda where he was, and he said, "Well, I really want to go down and see him." So I thought, okay, well, it's his desire. We'll go down and see Bhadra Sena. So I got in my car, And somehow or other, Jayananda was either pushed out or walked out to my car. I came as close as I could, and we had to drive down to. Thank you. We had to drive down to Newport Beach. It's before Laguna Beach, not very far away. But anyway, it's a very smoggy and congested motorway. It's a freeway called the 405, and there's in some places there's 5 or 6 lanes going in each direction. It's really, there's a lot of smoke. And occasionally I would drive down to Laguna Beach because it wasn't very far away, but inhaling all the carbon monoxide from all the car exhaust from all the cars made me very drowsy. And as I was driving down to Newport Beach, I said, Jayananda, I have to pull over because I can't stay awake any longer. And she said, that's okay, I'll drive. And I said, but Jayananda, you can't drive. You have leukemia. You have a terminal disease, terminal cancer. How's that possible? But he insisted that he drive. So he drove the rest of the way down there. And I was just amazed at how much energy he had. He was really determined to see this guy, Bhadrasena. So we finally got down to, it's probably the first or second time I'd been to Newport Beach, and it wasn't right in Newport Beach, it was a petrol station on the outskirts of Newport Beach. And sure enough, there he was, dispensing petrol into the cars. And Jayananda very slowly got out of the car and started to speak with him while he was pumping gas. And then there was a pause, and they talked, and then another car pulled up. And he said, well, I've got to give this guy some gas. So he put some more gas in there, and they talked, and 3 or 4 or 5 cars pulled up, and they were talking in between, and then finally we left him and got in the car and went back to Los Angeles. I was able to drive up. I got a little bit of energy by seeing this exchange. So I drove up back to Los Angeles, and then I asked on the way, I asked Jayananda, what was the outcome of your conversation? He said, well, he said it was good to see him again. But he wasn't going to be an active part of the Krishna consciousness movement, apparently. I mean, that's what I got out of it. Then he went back to he was very satisfied, at least, that he got to see this person. And then another incident occurred shortly after Jayananda departed this world. Every once in a while I would drive north of Los Angeles to a place called Topanga Canyon. And on the way, sometimes I would stop in a little kind of a market or a convenience store. So one day when I was driving up there, it was about a year or 2 after Jayananda had departed, I felt like somebody was stalking me. Like he was a tall guy with a beard, and I didn't think he was a devotee, and I thought, what does this guy want? Is he going to beat me up, or what's he going to do? I could smell that there was alcohol in his breath. I mean, it was very, very obvious. It permeated the whole place. It wasn't a very big shop. Anyway, finally, after I picked out a few things, like some apple juice and some yogurt or something like that, and I went up to pay for it. This guy approached me. I said, okay, well, now what does he want? What's he going to do? And he said, did you ever know a guy named Jayananda? And then I realized that maybe he's, just wanting to talk. And so I said, yeah, I know him. And he said, he was the nicest person I ever met. And I thought, well, that's a pretty interesting thing to say. And then he told me this story. He said that he had had this drinking problem for a long time. He was like an alcoholic for a long time, and he still was. But he said, I was down in Fisherman's Wharf, that's in San Francisco, and that's where I met Jayananda. And it was in July or something. It was about a month before the Rath Yatra festival took place in San Francisco. And Jayananda had said that he asked me. He said, come. Why don't you come back with me to our temple? And he said, if you do, the only thing is you have to stop drinking. We're going to work on this cart, and you just have to, for this time. It's only going to be for a few weeks, but you just have to stop drinking. And he said, well, I can do it for a couple of weeks. And he said, I mean, he got a real nice impression from Jayananda. He thought he was a very nice person. So they went back to the San Francisco temple together. And then he saw the Rath Yatra cart for the first time, and he was like amazed. He said, I thought it was just going to be a little wagon, like a kid's little wagon, and it turned out to be this huge cart. And it wasn't a cart, it was like a Rath Yatra, a chariot. And it was right behind the temple at that time. And he was amazed. And he actually was very good at carpentry. he helped Jayananda build the thing and built the wheels, and it was a kind of an engineering. Jayananda had studied constructional engineering when he was in Denver, Colorado. I'll go into that a little bit later. But anyway, he stopped drinking, and then the Rath Yatra, he went to the Rath Yatra festival in San Francisco, which was probably the second or third one that had taken place. And then he went back to his old ways. He hit the bottle again and started drinking. Unfortunately, but he had a very good association, and he had that very clear memory that Jayananda was very kind to him. So I realized that he wasn't going to do something really heavy to me. I just left, and he was in the shop, and that was the end of that. Now, the Rath Yatra, that picture that you saw was taken on May the 1st, 1977, and the Rath Yatra festival was August the 15th of 1977. Jayananda Prabhu departed this world just before the Rath Yatra took place. And before the Rath Yatra took place, from his hospital bed, he had a telephone by his bed, so he ordered this wood, and very mysteriously, almost magically, this big pile of timber appeared in the parking lot of the Los Angeles temple. I'm repeating a lot of what I said, but since there's a lot of new people here, I'm just going to say it again. It's always nice to hear about great Vaishnavas. By the way, and I'll come to this later, Prabhupada said that Jayananda, when he passed away, Prabhupada was still alive. He said that he had gone back to the spiritual world. Anyway, that's coming up later. So the rest of the story is that Jayananda was very keen, so he ordered all this wood, and we found out later that it was wood for the Rath Yatra. And we hadn't gotten permission to have a Rath Yatra, but I thought, well, this is a good place to have a Rath Yatra. It's a very big city. It's bigger than San Francisco, bigger population-wise and bigger geographically, too. It's a very big city, the biggest city in California, probably the second or third biggest city in the United States. So there was a long pause between that pile of lumber appearing and getting permission. Not a long pause. It was about maybe a week or two. But the person who was in charge hadn't given us permission to have a Rath Yatra, and the car wasn't even built yet. And how could there be another Rath Yatra just a few years after the one in Los Angeles? Nonetheless, when the head of the temple was, at that time it was Rameshwar Maharaj, he was the GBC in charge. When he saw this big pile of wood and he found out that Jayananda had ordered this wood, a big pile of 3 piles of timber to build the Rath Yatra, he kind of melted, and he gave us permission to have it. It was going to cost a lot of money. So he decided to put on a marathon. He put on a marathon to raise the $70,000 or some odd dollars, which is a lot of money. Even in those days, it was a lot of money. It's probably worth about $300,000 now. Anyway, he gave permission. There was a devotee in Los Angeles named Lalitanath, who was kind of a burly, husky guy, and he was a builder by trade, and Jayananda was a construction engineer. Between the two of them, they figured out how to build these Rath Yatra cars, and they were patterned exactly after the carts in Puri, slightly tilted on the upper deck, and the lower deck, big wheels. This Lalitanath was a very clever craftsman. He had the wheels shipped. He made the wheels. I mean, there were no wheels, so he made the wheels. He used some kind of conduit pipe that was about maybe 5 or 10 centimeters in diameter, about this size. And I don't know where he did it, where he got them, but he found some kind of axles, and then some central things for these spokes to go into, and then there was no wheels. So he ordered some just bands of steel, and he was able to bend them around. He was also a bit of a welder, so he was able to bend them around and form them into wheels. And then they were just metal wheels attached to spokes, and the spokes were attached to a metal hub, but there was no rubber. He then sent the spokes and the outside wheels that he made to another state, not far away, to Arizona, which is a couple of states away from California, and he made what they called vulcanized rubber. It was thick rubber, heavier rubber than the rubber on tire automobiles, but they were vulcanized to these strips of tin or stainless steel, whatever they were. They were vulcanized so that they couldn't come off. Then there was like 12 of them, so it was a pretty major feat. I don't know how it was paid for, but he did it. They did it, and they became the wheels of the Rath Yatra car. Then the Rath Yatra car gradually took place. They gradually took shape. And then there was a question of where would this Rath Yatra be able to take place? It's a very big city, but it's very spread out, and there's very few people around. Everyone goes to work in their cars in Los Angeles, and they're not on. There's hardly anybody on the streets. So I got into a car with Karandar. He was sort of like assistant GBC or something, or maybe he was the temple president at the time. And Jayananda insisted that he go with us, and so there was 4 people altogether: myself, Karandar, Jayananda, and Rameshwar, and we were looking for a good place in the city of Los Angeles to have a festival, a walking festival, a Rath Yatra. And so it was very difficult. It was difficult because there were no people around. We went down to the central part of Los Angeles, and there was that's the seemingly busiest part of the business district, central business district, where all the big shops are and stores. And there was nobody inside. Not nobody, but just very few. It was very sparse. Then we went to Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, and there was nobody there. Very few people. Everyone was in their cars. So as a last resort, we went to Venice Beach. Venice Beach is right on the ocean front, and we thought, well, we'll just go there just to see. But alas and alack, there were crowds of people. There were a lot of tourists. They would come to Los Angeles to see the ocean and to go on the promenade, the walkway right by the ocean. There were a lot of people there. So we pushed I was pushing Jayananda in his wheelchair, and Karandar and the other person that was with us, Rameshwar, were kind of walking behind, and we walked the whole distance from Santa Monica, which is an adjoining city, to also it's really part of Los Angeles, but it's separately incorporated. Anyway, we went down this large walkway, Oceanfront Walk it's called, and just as we got to the end of it, we started to think that this is the place. If we're going to have a Rath Yatra, it should be this place, and they're still having it today in that very same place. There was a policeman that was standing there in front of the wheelchair, like akimbo, with his hands on his hips and looking very stern. And we thought, uh-oh, we're going to get fined for having a wheelchair or something like that on this walkway. We didn't know what it was. He was just like going to stop us. And he said, I have to shake your hand. And he held out his right hand and to Jayananda. And they shook hands, and he said, I just want to thank you. He said, I don't know if you know about this, but there was a gunfight in the central part of Los Angeles last night, and one of your men saved my partner's life. We didn't know anything about it. It was just like a surprise. Here was this policeman, looked very mean, and he was congratulating us to say that we'd saved his friend's life. So that became the sort of crowning glory, so to speak, or the frosting on the cake. We said, well, that's a sign that we have to have the Rath Yatra in this place, because we have cooperation from the Los Angeles police, who are usually pretty rough characters. There's a lot of crime in that city. So then the Rath Yatra started to go with earnest, started to move ahead. We knew where we were going to have it, and the carts were being built. Then Jayananda was the driving force behind all this. From his bed, hospital bed, he was kind of calling all the shots. He was telling us where to go and what to do. We had to get permission from about 15 different departments. Los Angeles is a very crazy city. We had to get permission from and there were 2 cities involved, because part of it was in Santa Monica, part of it was in Los Angeles. So we had to get police permission, we had to get roadway permission, fire department permission, health department permission, and altogether it was about 15 different departments. We personally had to go to and Park and Recreation Commission. That was very, and they were kind of like, what are you guys going to do anyway? Then we thought, well, we have to advertise it because no one knows about it. And Los Angeles is a very spread out place. It's hard to advertise. Somehow or other, I went with, I think it was Chiru, and we went north to San Francisco, and we made a little video, about a maybe 30-second video to be played on the public service announcement time. But then we thought that we have to do something more than this. So we thought we would put banners up across, we'd string them across the main intersections of Los Angeles. They were yellow colored, and we did this. We bought big bolts of yellow cloth about 1 meter high and 25 meters long or something like that. Not that long, but some of them were. And then a devotee rented an industrial sewing machine, and he sewed on the words "Festival of the Chariots" in purple. So it was a purple Festival of the Chariots against a yellow banner kind of thing. And they were, and then we went out like about a week before the festival. By that time Jayananda had departed, but he was kind of like telling us what to do all the time. But he was aware that when I say we, it was mostly myself and a guy named Prabhu who was a New Yorker. We were doing all the festival, and it became like the biggest thing that Los Angeles had ever done, that the devotees had ever done. We made a chart. It was about 1 meter tall and about a meter long. It had 2 axes on it. One was vertical and one was horizontal, and one had the name of every single devotee who lived in that community. There were about 45 or 50 adults in that community. And on the horizontal axis, it had the days of the week. So everyone had to do something every day. That was the level of organization that this event required. Then there was the prasadam, and it was quite a big event. We also made signs that showed, they were like, the signs that we see down on the farm, only they were like on poles, and each one pointed in different directions to tell people where to go to see this and to see that. That was going to be, we're going to put those up at Venice Beach. And the problem was we didn't have any tents. I mean, things that in Los Angeles are done in kind of a grand fashion. So we thought we had to have tents, shamayanas, and all sorts of very colorful things. The shamayanas and the tents, because we were trying to save money, came from India. And they were shipped from India. They were purchased by a guy named Chiru in India. They were shipped to Los Angeles. And it was a very difficult thing because it was all kind of last minute. Jayananda wanted this to be a very big event, and we were all running on his energy. So I remember in one of the temple buildings being on the telephone to Los Angeles and to India from Los Angeles, and being on the telephone from Los Angeles to India at that time, 1977, was no easy thing. It was very, it was very faint, and they had different systems. They had to call you back, and it was very complicated. It's not like you were talking to someone in the next room. It was like, very faint and far away. Somehow these tents and the shamayanas arrived 1 or 2 days before the festival. They arrived on a Friday night, and we had to get them out of the customs and out of the ship and all that on a weekend, on a Saturday and Sunday. And so somehow or other we went down to the people who take things, the expediters who take things out of customs, early a Saturday morning, and there was only one person working there. He said, well, ordinarily I wouldn't be able to do anything until Monday, but we were very enthusiastic. Since you're insisting, I just can't not let you get these things out. So somehow or other he bent the rules, and we got all these shamayanas and tents out of the ship and out of customs in time for the festival, which was the next day, August the 15th. It was Indian Independence Day. Well, I'm cutting a lot of corners to make this very long, detailed story fit into the time frame we have. Anyway, the festival was well along the way. The fire department permission had been given, but the day of the festival, the morning of the festival, and I was up along with a few other people all night, the night, literally all night on the night before, and it was the day before, in the days before cell phones. Therefore, we had walkie-talkies between the beach, which was about 8 kilometers away, where the festival site was, and the temple. And I remember going in, shaving, and talking on the walkie-talkie and talking on the telephone all at the same time. It was that intense. Somehow or other, by various means, the money was raised. Not only the marathon, but from other sources. And somehow it was all ready. So I remember going down to the site, along with some other people, on the morning of the festival. And the fire people were testing all the shamayanas and the tents to see if they were fireproof. And lo and behold, they struck a match, and they because they're petroleum-based entities, they started to go up in flame. And he said, well, I can't let you have this festival if these things aren't waterproofed or flame-proofed. He said, but I really don't want to stop this festival. He said, if you can get a hose that's 200 feet long or whatever it was, some real long hose, and hook it up to a tap, I'll let you go on with it. So somehow we scrambled and put hoses together and got something that was 200 feet or 200 meters long. And then the inspector from the fire department gave his permission that we could go ahead. It was a pretty amazing event. And then, as I said, in the United States, things are, especially in Los Angeles, things are done in a very grand style. We thought we would have to have some elephants. I don't know where this idea came about, but we thought we had to have real live elephants. So there's a place near Los Angeles. It's called Riverside. This is a place that rents for Hollywood movies, elephants, cheetahs, tigers, lions that are trained to be, they're very ferocious beasts, but they're trained to be very gentle. So somehow or other, we were able to rent these elephants, big elephants. I mean, of course, all elephants are big, but these were fully grown. We painted them different colors and had riders on them. I mean, they were part of the procession. And they even attracted a lot more attention than the Rath Yatra carts, because it's very unusual for people to see an elephant in a big city. And then at the end of the procession, there was about 4 acres of grass, right on the ocean front. So the elephants stopped there, and they gave rides. They had these like little miniature palanquins, the kind that fit on the backs of elephants. They could take about 6 children at a time on a ride. So they went around in a circle, and they got a free, not a free, they had to pay for the elephant rides. It was quite an event. Somehow or other, it was a very auspicious thing, and devotees were, because of Jayananda, were very enthusiastic about everything, including one devotee who somehow or other got into the CBS television national news desk and convinced the national news director, or the person who's in charge, to cover the event, which is kind of very unusual, because even for national news they talk about scandals and plane crashes and football matches and stuff like that, and usually it's negative stuff, but this was a positive thing, so it was very unusual. That day, a lady, her name was Karen Lovejoy. I remember that name, Lovejoy. That's her name, Lovejoy. It was very unusual, and she was the reporter for this television station. At that time, there were 3 major television stations in probably in the world. It was before cable news network. There was ABC, CBS, and NBC. So this was CBS. It was a pretty big thing. It was going to go all over the country. So this lady interviewed me for a while, and we put together a news release saying that we were expecting 100,000 people or something like that. So it turned out to be a pretty big thing. Anyway, this lady, Karen Lovejoy, was eating samosas, and she said, "This is the most wonderful event that I've ever covered." And of course, she had her cameraman there. And then she interviewed a lot of people that were at the festival. And it was kind of a miracle that the 2 of the people that she interviewed were Jayananda's parents. And and she asked them, where do you live? And they said, well, we live in Grand Junction, Colorado. And she said, well, that's a long ways away. Why are you here? She said, well, our son built these carts, and he died about a month ago. And that became the very newsworthy thing, that they had come all the way from Grand Junction to see carts built by their departed son. Very interesting. It was a man and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Kaur. Then it was over. I mean, it went on for, they had stages and many freestanding booths. It was like a big event. When it was over, it took those of us who were involved in organizing it till about 10 o'clock at night to wind everything down, dismantle the stages, and you know, it was like on city property, so everything had to be done in a certain time frame. Then I got into, Jayananda had passed away, got into the temple proper and sat around a kind of a conference table with Rameshwaran, Karandar, and various other people who were in charge. And then we decided, well, there hasn't been anything, we'll watch the late news and just see if it's on there. Started at 11:30. And sure enough, at the end of the news broadcast, a man was, a presenter was sitting in front of a large picture, a backdrop of the Jagannath Puri temple. I don't know where they got it. And all of a sudden, there was this Rath Yatra, and the elephants and the chariots were on national television. It was a pretty big thing at that time. It's late at night, but people watched it. It was a Sunday night. And that's when we saw Jayananda's parents for the first time being interviewed. And none of us knew that this had happened until it was, and that kind of was the frosting on the cake. That was the thing that made this event that millions of people could see, hear about Jayananda and could see his parents speaking on television, and that it was accepted by a news network that mainly talks about plane crashes and, you know, politicians condemning one another and stuff like that. So it was a good way to end the evening. I see our time is up, so I'll just say one last thing. One thing that Jayananda used to constantly say to us is that he had one aspiration, one hope. When he was still alive, he said, I want to die before Prabhupada dies. I don't want to see him pass away. And that actually happened. So anyway, Prabhupada wasn't there. He was in London or someplace far away at the time. And pictures of the Rath Yatra were shown to him while he was sitting in his darshan room in Bhaktivedanta Manor. And when he looked at the color photographs, little photographs, but they were good photographs, his comment was, "We have never seen such carts. We have never seen such carts." He was and then he asked all the devotees to leave the room so he could meditate on this, that it had become such a big event in Los Angeles, which had become it was called the Western World Headquarters at that time. So I think time to stop. Oh, there's one other thing that I'll add, and there was a classmate from Grand Junction, Colorado, a high school classmate of Jayananda's, who by chance, after Jayananda passed away, went to Durban, South Africa to the Rath Yatra Festival in Durban, South Africa, Chatsworth or wherever it is, and he saw this picture of Jayananda on the cart, and he thought he recognized him, but he couldn't say for sure who it was because he'd never seen the shaved head, and many years had gone by, and he wasn't sure, and he started asking people, who is that man in the picture? And they said, well, Jim Kaur, Jayananda. That didn't mean anything to him. Finally, he found a person who said, well, that's Jayananda or Jim Kaur, and then he remembered the name Jim Kaur. He also remembered that Jim Kaur's father had the same name, Jim Kaur Sr., and that he worked for a paint company called Sherwin-Williams. He made a phone call, this man, his name is Andrew Hallam. He lived in Sherman Oaks, California, which is near Los Angeles, made a telephone call from Durban, South Africa, to wherever their headquarters is in the United States, Sherwin-Williams Paint, and he talked to this, somehow or other he tracked down this James Kaur Sr. and told him, he said, you know what your son has done? And then he described the Rath Yatra and that his picture was in the chariot and it was a big festival and that sort of thing. And he wrote about this. He's the guy that was the person who wrote a letter to all of the Oakwood High School, it was called, Oakwood High School alumni. And he narrated this story, how about he was in South Africa and he said, I don't understand too much about the philosophy of Hare Krishna. I think they believe in reincarnation or something like that. But he said, if you ever you mention the name Jayananda, you'll be treated with, you'll get the red carpet treatment. That's the letter he wrote to his classmates. Anyway, Hare Krishna. Jayananda Prabhu Ki Jai. So I think we have a little time if you have anything you want to ask. I guess we have maybe 4 minutes or 3 minutes. Yes?
With the striving consciousness as devotees to be like following in the footsteps of Jayananda, how can we develop, like, cultivate the desire to do marvelous things like he did?
Well, it's kind of part of our philosophy that we try to follow in the footsteps of the previous great souls who departed one way or another. And there's no trick or easy formula how to do that. We just, there's a statement that says Mahajanayena Gatasva Panta, that the secrets of Krishna consciousness are in the minds of the Mahajans, or the great souls. We just have to associate with as many devotees, especially advanced devotees, as we can, and be like them, and try to be like them. I mean, I'm trying to do it myself, so everyone tries to do it, but it's not an easy thing. If there was another?
This morning, can you wind back a few years? Do you have any memories of Jayananda first coming to San Francisco in 1967?
Yeah, I think, I forget what year it was, but it would have been when he first, before he shaved up, he was driving a taxi cab. And yeah, that's what he was doing. And he used to, somehow or other, he got some Back to Godhead magazines, and he would give them out to his clients. So that's how I first met him. He got out of his cab to get some more Back to God, because he'd run out. And somehow or other he found the temple. And the devotee started talking to him, and then by and by he moved in. That's how he was first seen, as a taxi cab driver, even though he had a degree in structural engineering. But he didn't like the corporate world. That's why he ended up driving a taxi.
He was very enthusiastic. Is there some characteristics of his enthusiasm?
He wasn't enthusiastic in the sense that he was like, always bubbling over. I remember he gave a class in San Diego sometime after he was a devotee, and he was talking about what a glorious thing devotional service was. And he used that term, devotional service is very glorious. So it was enthusiasm, but it was kind of muted. It was contagious in a way, because he was talking about devotional service being very glorious. And everyone knew the kind of life he led, that he was very austere and very devoted, and so on. He was very dear to Srila Prabhupada, obviously. They knew that. So anything else? Yes? One last.
You were going to talk about his departure, or Prabhupada?
Well, what happened was he had this sort of terminal disease, leukemia. It's a kind of cancer that gets into the bones and whatever. So I wasn't there when he actually departed this world. I was in San Diego raising money or something like that. And I phoned up to Los Angeles and said that probably he was going to pass away that night. And what happened, what I was told, was that a garland fell from their Jagannath deity, a garland. Somehow the Jagannath deities in Los Angeles had garlands on, and it was brought in to Jayananda and was put around his neck shortly after he departed. When Prabhupada heard about the circumstances surrounding the departure, that people were chanting, and he always had Prabhupada chanting in his ear, even at the time of death, that's when Prabhupada wrote that letter that said he had attained the spiritual world. So it was a very auspicious departure. So I think that'll be all. Thank you very much. Jayananda Prabhu Ki Jai. And I'll be giving class next Thursday if anyone is interested. Probably not.